This keyword in JavaScript is arguably one of the most confusing topics ever, which sometimes makes even senior developers scratch their heads. And that is why this is one of the most important topics for JavaScript interviews, because it allows interviewers to ask tricky questions and confuse the candidates. But worry not, Roadside Coder is here to save the day, because in this video we will cover this keyword from absolute scratch and discuss the most asked interview questions on it. Also, before starting, if you haven't yet seen the previous video of this series which was on objects, I would highly recommend you to watch it before starting this one for better understanding. So there are two types when it comes to object binding in JavaScript. One is implicit and other is explicit. Implicit binding is applied when you invoke a function in an object using the dot notation. This keyword in such scenarios will point to the object using which the function was invoked, or simply the object on the left hand side of the dot. Explicit binding can be applied using call, bind and apply, but we will discuss that in our next video because this video is all about this keyword. Alright, so I've opened VS Code over here with simple HTML, CSS and JavaScript files. And let's go on and quickly run this HTML file. Open with live server. And there we go. We have opened this in our browser. Let me open the console real quick. So how do you go on to explain what this keyword is? So in English language, we use pronoun this to reference something. Like suppose we have a bucket of fruits. When we say this inside of it, so that will mean the bucket itself. For example, fruits are kept in this bucket. Similarly, in JavaScript, the this keyword is used to reference something like an object. So do you remember from our previous video on objects that everything in JavaScript is an object? And even functions are first class objects. So what this keyword will mean will depend on the context we are currently in. For example, this is a global context right here, right? So for example, over here, if I come and write this dot a equals 5 and let's console log this dot a. So this over here will point to our global object. So if we go on and see, yep, we see 5. So if I go on and only print this, you're gonna see that we get this window object or the global object, and inside of it you can find a equals 5. So this is basically how this keyword works. It depends on the context on which this is currently in. We're gonna discuss more context as we go along. Now this behavior would have been a little bit different if this was inside of a function. So let's say I'm gonna create a function over here. This will simply console log this. Now when we go on and call getParam over here, now this right here will target its parent object. And what is the parent object for this function is? It is again the window object. But let's say if this function was inside of an object, then it would have targeted that object, which we'll discuss in just a minute. So let me show you. So you see, again, we get 5 as an output because still it's targeting the window object right here, since the parent is the window object. But what will it print in case of, let's say, an arrow function? It will still target the window object. So you will think that, okay, normal function and arrow function work absolutely the same, right? No, that's not the case. And I will show you in just a minute. So how arrow function performs is, in this case, it will obviously target the window object. But normally what arrow function does is, it takes this from the outer normal function. Now this won't make much sense now, since you can see it's also pointing to the window object. So let's see the behavior of this keyword inside of an object and you will understand this better. So I'm going to remove all of this and create an object over here. So let's select user, and inside this I'm going to keep a name and age, and we're going to create a function inside of it called getDetails. Alright, and this thing will just simply point to this dot name, and this will just print this dot name. Now over here, since we are inside of an object, this keyword right here will point to this object. That is, this normal function will point to this object right here. So if we go on and print this, so I'll say user dot getDetails, and now you're gonna see we get Piyush. This is no longer targeting the window object, it's targeting the parent object, which is user in this case. So if you simply go on and print this, you're gonna see we get this object over here. Cool. But what would have happened if this was even nested further inside of this object? So if I, let's say, child obj, and I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna, let's say, add a new name called site coder. Below this, I'll add this object and say this dot new name, comma, and this dot name. So what do you think will this point to? Will this point to this object right here or this object right here? Let's see the output. Okay, sorry, my bad. I need to call user dot child obj dot get details. Yeah. So we get roadside coder and undefined. So currently it is pointing to this object and not the parent object. So you see, this normal function will point only to the immediate parent. That is this one. Now let's see what happens if we replace this with an arrow function. So get details will be an arrow function such as this, and I'm gonna keep this dot name inside of it. Let's call this user dot get details. Let's see what do we get. So we get nothing. So that means this is not pointing to this object right here. Let's see what is it pointing to. I'm just gonna print this. So it's pointing to the window object. Why? So how arrow function works is that this keyword value of arrow function comes from its parent function. So let's say if we have a parent function which is a normal function, it's gonna take the reference of this from that function itself. That is the parent of that function. So let me show you. I know it must be a little bit confusing right now, but let me demonstrate it for you. So let's make this a normal function for now. And inside of this, I'm gonna create a nested arrow function. So you see, this is an arrow function inside of this normal function, and I'm gonna call this nested arrow. Now what will happen over here is the value of this will be user now. Why? Because it takes the value of this from its parent function, and this parent function is taking the value of this from this user. So that's why this is inheriting that value from get details into this nested arrow, and that's why it is pointing to get details. But in the previous case, in this case, it didn't have any parent normal function. So that's why it was pointing to the window object. So let's see if we go on and run this now. You're gonna see we get Piyush, because this is pointing to this user object over here, and we're printing this dot name. So how this keyword will perform inside of a class or a constructor? So let me create a class user over here. Inside of the class, I'm gonna have a constructor which takes a number or a name, let's say. So this dot name will be n, and we're gonna have a function called get name. I'm gonna console log this dot name inside of it. Now this inside of a class will point to everything that is inside of this constructor. So if we go on and create a new object with this class, const user equals new user with name of Piyush. So if you don't know much about this constructors and class, what this is doing is it's creating a new object from the above class, from this constructor that we have provided it. So let me show you. So if I go on and just console log simply user, you're gonna see that this gives us object with the name of Piyush, and inside of this it's gonna have this method as well, access to this method called get name. So now if I run this user dot get name, and you're gonna see this gives us Piyush. So inside of a class, this points to all of these variables that are inside of this constructor. Also, if you want me to create a separate, more in-depth video on classes, constructor, or this new keyword, just let me know in the comments down below and I'll make a video for you all. Also, if you would like to read the blog for this video and access all of these interview questions that I'm going to discuss on this video, you can go and click the link in the description down below and access the blog for this video. Alright, so now it's time to discuss one of the most asked interview questions in JavaScript interview on this keyword. So first question will be this. Interviewer can provide you with this code snippet right over here and can ask you what is going to be the output for the same. So I want you to pause this video right here and go and try to solve this question and comment down below what is going to be the answer for this. Okay, so I hope you have solved this question. So let's see what the output for this is. So we have an object right over here with first name Piyush and a method called getName, which has another variable called first name, and we are returning this dot first name. Okay, so let's go on and call this over here and let's see what is going to be the output for this. So as we discussed, this dot first name, this over here will be pointing to this user object over here and not this function. So obviously this will print Piyush. And let me just, why have I written same name over here? So yeah, just to differentiate. So let's see what's going to be the output. And the output will be Piyush as expected. I know this is a very basic question, but sometimes if you don't have a good understanding of this keyword, people think that, okay, this dot first name might point to this function itself and not the parent object. So people make mistake at this part. All right, pause. If you're not yet following me on Twitter, go to twitter.com/Piyush_Eon or click the link in the description down below and hit that follow button right now. I'm waiting for you. I'm still waiting. Okay, fine. Let's continue with the video. Now, question 2 will be what is going to be the result of accessing its ref and why. So we have been provided this code snippet over here with make user function. So what's happening inside of it? We're calling this make user function and this is returning us this object right over here with name John and ref of this. Now, what will this be pointing over here? Let's see. So after that, we are taking this result object and storing it inside of a variable. And then we are calling that variable with user.ref.name. So we are supposed to print this name over here. So what do you think will be the output? So we don't get any output. This is weird. Let's try to print user itself. What do we have inside of the user? Okay, so we have name John and we have ref window. But ref had this, right? That means this should be pointing to this over here and this should have printed the name. It's because when we are calling this function over here, what is the parent object? The parent object is the window object. So this will be pointing to window object. That is, this inside of the ref will be pointing to window object and window object doesn't have anything called name. So that's why this is empty. A lot of people think that this will be pointing to this object right here and that's why it will print this name as John, but that's not the case. Now the interviewer can ask you how will you go on and fix this function right over here so that it references and gets the name John in the output. So what we can do over here is instead of assigning this directly, what we can do is we can make this ref as a function so that this function can point to this object over here. So if I now say return this will no longer be pointing to the window object because it's already inside of an object, right? So this will point to this name object. Let's see. Oops, my bad. So I'm supposed to call this and then say dot name. Now let's see. Yep, we get John in the output. Now again, we have an output based question over here where we have provided an object called user with name Piyush Agarwal and we have a method inside of it called log message, which is console logging this dot name. And then we have a setTimeout, which is calling this user.log message after 1 second. So what do you think will be the output? So a lot of people will think, okay, this is a normal method, right? This is pointing this dot name. So this will obviously point to user and this will print name, that is Piyush Agarwal. But that is not going to be the case. This will print undefined. So let me show you. Yep, this is printing undefined or nothing in the console. It's because this setTimeout is using user.log message as a callback rather than a method. So this complete function right here will be copied inside this setTimeout. And this will no longer have access to this user object right over here. And so obviously this will, since it's executing independently, in this case, this will have the access to the window object and window object doesn't have anything such as name. So that's why this is printing undefined. But then again, interviewer can ask you then how will you go on and fix this code to make it work and make it point to name Piyush Agarwal. So what we can do is we can avoid creating this as a callback. And we can wrap this inside of a function. So I'm going to create an anonymous function over here. And by the way, I've discussed this anonymous function and all the properties of function in my functions video of this JavaScript interview series. So if you want to go on and watch that, link will be in the description below or I button above. So yep, we have added a function over here and we are calling this inside of this function. And now you'll see that this will be invoked as a method of this user object. Yep, we get this output as Piyush Agarwal. So I know these questions are a bit tricky, but you have to practice this, and when you go on and practice a lot of such questions, then you'll start to understand how this keyword truly works. Now the next output based question is this. We have been provided a user object with a name and two methods. One is a normal function and another is an arrow function. And we are calling both of them over here, and we are supposed to tell what is going to be the output for both of them. Now, as we discussed earlier, greet over here is a normal function. So this for the greet function will point to this user object. But this farewell is an arrow function. So this value inside of an arrow function always equals to this of the outer scope. And we don't have any parent function over here. So obviously this will point to the window object. So this will be goodbye undefined. So let's see. Yep, you see, this is undefined and we get hello Piyush for this one. Alright, so the next question is to create an object calculator as follows. So we need to create an object calculator, which when we run with the method calculator.read, calculator.read will read two values from the user. And when we go on to say calculator.sum, will add those two values, and we print calculator.multiply or calculator.mul, it will multiply those two values, right? Sounds easy. Let's see. So first of all, let's create this read function over here. So I'm gonna add this read method. And I'm gonna add two variables inside of this. First is this .a. So I'm gonna prompt the user to enter it. We're gonna say enter a, and by default it will be 0. And then I'm gonna ask the user to enter b, which also will be by default 0. So we have added this a and b variable to this object right over here, right? Now let's go on and create this sum method. Now this is simple. What we are simply supposed to do over here is we're supposed to return this .a plus this .b. And similarly, we can create a multiply function over here, which will simply multiply this. And that's it. We're done. Let's run this. And let's go to the browser and let's enter 5 value of a and value of b, let's say 2. Oh, my bad. This accepted it as a string. So let me add this plus over here to convert it into the number. And now if we go on and run this, 5 and 2, and yep, we get this sum and we get this multiply. Awesome. So this is going to be the solution for this question. Okay, so we have another output based question over here. Here we have a variable called length, which is equals to 4. And we have a function called callback. Then we have an object with length 5 and method which takes a function and calls it inside of it. Okay, cool. So now we are calling this object method and we are providing this callback to it. So what do you think is going to be the output for this one? So if we talk about this method over here, this will obviously target to this object, right? But since this function is called inside of this object, this will not target to this object right over here. This will target to global object. So this dot length will print length equals 4 and not length equals 5. So let's go and see the output. Yep, we get length equals 4. Awesome. Now similarly, interviewer can modify this question and he can remove this fn right over here. And since we are providing this callback, let's say we are providing it few more params or arguments. And inside of it, we are calling the first argument of 0. Now, if you don't know how this is working, you can go on and check out my video on functions where I've explained how this argument keyword works. So basically this argument keyword takes all of these params that are being sent to this method function as an array. So we are taking the first element, which is this callback. So now if we are calling this over here, then what do you think is going to be the output for this? This is a really tricky question, which is asked a lot in a senior developer interviews. So arguments over here will be this array, right? With callback function 2 and 3. Now this array in itself is an object. So when you call this callback over here, this will obviously target to its parent object, right? So what is its parent object? This array right over here. And if you go on and check the prototype of an array, it has a property called length. So length of this array will be 3, not 4, not 5. It will print 3 as an output. So if we go on and see, yep, we get 3 as an output. So let me demonstrate it clearly. If I log arguments, you're gonna see we get this array over here with a callback function 2 and 3, just as we demonstrated. But if you check over here, we have this length property as well, which is demonstrating the length of this array, which is 3. So this will obviously go on and print 3 over here. So yeah, this was one of the most tricky questions that is very frequently asked in these JavaScript interviews. Now the next question that an interviewer can ask you is this: implement calc. So interviewer has provided you with this code snippet. This calc can be an object and function, anything that you like, and it can infinitely add this, add, multiply, subtract, add, and you can add n number of function calls after it, and this should perform the same. So let's say if the initial value of calc is 0, so this should add 10 to 0, then it should multiply to the result of this one, then it should subtract 30 from the result of this one, and so on. So actually this question was asked to me during my Cast24 interview, and I've already made a complete video on Cast24 interview. So I'm gonna play that clip right over here. So let's go on and implement this out. So I'm gonna take a empty function called calc, and obviously it's gonna have a total, which will be initially 0. Now we have a bunch of functions over here. First of all is add. So I'm gonna say add, and I'm gonna write the logic inside of it. So we will get this param or this value from the user. So I'm gonna take this a, and I'm gonna say this dot total equals this dot total plus a, or you can also write it like this. And then I'm gonna simply return this. So why am I returning this? Because I need to return this whole object over here, because only then we are going to be able to access more of the functions from this particular object. Then the next thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to add this multiply object, the multiply function, the subtract function. So let me write the logic for these real quick. Just like this, just like add, we have added this multiply and subtract function. So every time we do this, it's gonna do the operation with this dot total, that is this variable right here, and it's going to return the whole object so that we can chain multiple functions after it. So now I'm guessing this should work. Let's go on. Yep, we got the result as 30. So this is how you go on and implement this code snippet right here. Alright, so these were the most asked interview questions on this keyword. Now in our next video, I'm gonna explain the explicit binding, and we're gonna discuss questions on call, bind, and apply. And that is a very important topic when it comes to JavaScript interviews. So subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss that video, and access our complete JavaScript interview series from the link in the description down below or I button above. And if you like this video, give this video a huge fat thumbs up, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.